She was 26, exhausted, and drowning in $347,000 of her dying mother's medical bills. He was 62, silver-haired, scarred, and the most dangerous man in the room. He didn't ask for her number. He didn't flirt. He simply looked at her and said, "Sit down. I already paid your mother's debt." She should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But something in his storm gray eyes stopped her cold because for the first time in 3 years, someone looked at her like she was worth saving. This channel is your home for stories about mafia bosses with hidden hearts, love that breaks every rule, and the family bonds that hold broken people together. Because today's story reminds us that real love doesn't check your age, your past, or your sins. It only asks, are you brave enough to let someone truly see you? If that already gave you chills, hit like, drop a comment telling me what you think she should have done, share this with someone who needs to believe in second chances, and subscribe, because the best stories are just getting started.
I remember the phone just dropping from my hand, the clatter on the floor. Marco rushed over, bless his heart, looking so worried. He asked, "Lily, are you okay? Mr. Constantino? Did he harm you?" No. The word felt foreign, like someone else had said it. No, he didn't hurt me. But as I bent down for my phone, my hands were still trembling. I saw myself in that dark screen, eyes wide and wild, my face all flushed. I looked like I'd just walked off a cliff, but hadn't started to fall yet. And a little voice in my head whispered that maybe, just maybe, I'd been falling for a long while. I just hadn't realized it until Salvatore Constantino showed up, either to catch me or pull me down into the darkness with him. That night was sleepless. How could anyone sleep? Every time my eyes shut, I saw him. That silver hair, those stormy eyes, and the scar through his eyebrow, a warning sign I'd completely missed. The money was just sitting in my bank account like a living creature, thrumming with a terrifying energy. I must have checked it 17 times between midnight and sunrise, thinking I'd hallucinated the whole thing from sheer exhaustion. But it was there. $347,000. It was real. At 6 a.m., I called that hospice I'd researched for months. You know, the one, with the beautiful gardens and private rooms, and a doctor who actually cared about pain. The one I knew we could never, ever hope for. "We'd like to arrange for my mother's intake," I said, my voice cracking on the word mother. "Today, if at all possible." The woman on the phone didn't even hesitate at the price. Money talks, and apparently, I was suddenly fluent. By noon, Mom was settled in a room that smelled of lavender, not antiseptic and misery. She cried when she saw it, honey. The first tears I'd seen in months that weren't from pain. The first real smile that reached her eyes since she got sick. "How did you manage this, baby?" she whispered. Her hand, oh, it was so fragile by then, just bone and paper-thin skin, holding onto mine. "Don't you worry about it, Mama." I kissed her forehead, trying to memorize her scent, which was already starting to fade a little more each day. "Just get some rest. Just be comfortable." But she looked at me with that way mothers have, knowing something was different, that her little girl had changed completely overnight. "What did you do, Lily?" "Nothing bad," I lied. "I promise." By 6:45 p.m., I was standing in front of my little apartment's cracked mirror, and I hardly knew the person looking back. After getting Mom settled, I had planned on calling the number from that black card to tell Salvatore Constantino I couldn't do it. That having dinner with a man who practically dripped danger was just insane, no matter the cost. But my fingers dialed a different number instead. My friend Rachel, who was a manager at a fancy boutique and owed me more favors than I could count. "I need a dress," I told her. "Something for, I don't even know, dinner with someone important." Rachel, bless her heart, didn't ask a single question, just said to come on over. An hour later, I left with a dress that would have taken me a lifetime to afford. Rachel just waved off my attempts to pay, giving me a look that said we'd have a long talk later. It was this midnight blue color, almost black in the right light. It fit me in a way that made me feel both vulnerable and incredibly strong. It was a simple dress, really, modest neckline and hem just above the knee, but the way it was cut, the feel of the fabric, it made me feel like a whole new person. I remember I wore my hair down for the first time in what felt like forever. Just dark waves past my shoulders. My makeup was simple. I never was very good with much more than a little mascara and some lip gloss. And these small silver earrings my mother had, given me for my 21st birthday. Looking in that mirror, I saw a stranger. Someone who looked like she might belong in the VIP section at Giovanni's, someone who could sit across from a man like Salvatore Constantino and not fall to pieces. It was all a fragile illusion, of course, but I hoped it would last for one evening. My phone buzzed. It was a text from that same unknown number. "A car is waiting downstairs." I grabbed my purse, another loan from Rachel, and walked down the 4 flights of stairs from my apartment, my heels clicking on the old, cracked linoleum. The whole building smelled of stale cooking oil and dampness. The lights in the hallway were flickering, just like they always did. And there, parked out front like a sleek predator among guppies, was a Mercedes. Not just any Mercedes, mind you, but an S-Class with windows so dark they looked like black mirrors. A man in a tailored suit was standing by the back door, all business and security, his eyes covered by dark sunglasses even though the sun was setting. He opened the door for me as I got closer, his face perfectly blank. "Miss Lily, Mr. Constantino is waiting." The inside of the car smelled of rich leather and that same cedar scent from the night before. The seats were incredibly soft, the kind of luxury you only see in the movies. When that heavy door clicked shut behind me, a jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me. I was alone with him. Salvatore was sitting in the far corner of the back seat. There was maybe 2 feet of space between us, but it felt like both a mile and no space at all. He had on another incredible suit, charcoal gray this time, with a black shirt that made his silver hair almost glow in the dim light. His gray eyes swept over me, slowly, taking in every single detail. I felt a blush creep up my neck, my chest, my cheeks. "You came," he finally said, and his voice held a hint of what might have been surprise if he were a different kind of man. "You took care of my mother's bills." I was clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles were white. "I keep my promises." Most people would have taken the money and run. The car just glided into traffic so smoothly. We couldn't even see the driver behind a dark glass partition. They would have vanished, changed their number, moved away. "Well, I'm not most people." He almost smiled at that. "No," he said, "you're not." A heavy silence fell between us, filled with all the things we weren't saying. The car moved through the city, past places I knew, and then into neighborhoods I'd never seen before, where the streets were pristine, the cars were fancier, and the people looked like they were sculpted from marble. "Where are we going?" I finally had to ask when the quiet became too much to bear. "Somewhere private." He shifted just a little, and I was suddenly so aware of how close he was, how that cedar scent seemed to curl around me. "Giovanni's is too public, too many eyes, too many ears." A sharp spike of fear went right through my chest. I remember clearing my throat and saying, "I thought we were having dinner." "We are." He must have seen the look on my face, because his voice softened a bit. "I'm not going to hurt you, Lily. You have my word on that." The word of a man I didn't even know. But as the words came out, I realized I was starting to see him differently. The bodyguards, that expensive car, the way the manager at Giovanni's nearly bowed when he walked in, the fact that he knew my mother's medical expenses down to the last dollar. "You know who I am," I said, putting the pieces together. "But I have no idea who you are." "Not really." The name on the card, Salvatore Constantino. It sounds vaguely familiar, but I just can't place it. Good. He reached inside his jacket, and I swear every muscle in my body locked up until he pulled out nothing but a phone. It means you don't waste your time reading police blotters or following news about organized crime. Organized crime. The words were like a splash of ice water. You're a lot of things. He put the phone away. But mostly, I'm a businessman who works in areas where the law is negotiable. A criminal. That's one way to put it. He didn't deny it, didn't try to explain it away. He just accepted it. I should have told the driver to stop the car. I should have jumped out right there. I should have run screaming from that car and from him and the dangerous world that was pulling me in. But instead, I heard myself ask him, why me? The car turned onto a street lined with trees, where huge mansions were hidden behind iron gates. Salvatore was quiet for such a long time, I didn't think he was going to answer. When he finally did, his voice was deeper, rougher somehow. I'm 62 years old, Lily. I have built an empire on blood and fear, on a kind of ruthlessness most people can't even fathom. I have done things that would make you sick, things I can never take back, and things I wouldn't take back even if I had the chance. He turned to look right at me then, and the intensity in his gaze just stole my breath. Everyone, my partners, my enemies, my own family, they all said I was too old for some things, too cold, that I'd traded my humanity for power a long time ago. His hand came up, and I froze as his fingers gently brushed a piece of hair from my face. The touch was so tender, so respectful, and it didn't fit with anything he'd just told me about himself. And then you looked at me like I was just a man, tired, human, not a monster, not a legend, not a way to get something. A man. I didn't know who you were. His hand fell away, but I could still feel the warmth of his fingers on my skin. Do you have any idea what that's worth? To be seen as human by someone with no reason to pretend? The car pulled through a large gate that swung open for us, revealing a long driveway that wound through perfect gardens, all leading to a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. You know, the first time I saw the house, it was something else. A mix of sleek, modern design with this old-world grace. All stone and glass, with spaces so big they soared, and it was lit up from the inside like a treasure chest. This was going to be my home. The car pulled up under a covered entrance, and a door opened right away. It wasn't the driver, but another security guy, this one a bit older, with some silver in his dark hair. His eyes sized me up in a second, decided I wasn't a problem, and then dismissed me. Your grandfather got out first and offered me his hand. I only paused for a heartbeat before I took it. His hand was so warm and strong, but his grip was gentle. I knew I could pull away, but I didn't want to. That feeling should have scared me, but it didn't. It felt right, like it was always meant to be. Inside, the place just took your breath away. The marble floors shone, reflecting these enormous crystal chandeliers, and the art on the walls belonged in a museum. I remember this incredible staircase sweeping up to the second floor, and I could see a huge, formal dining room through an archway. But Sal, your grandfather, he led me right past all that glamour. We went down this long hall lined with photos I wished I could have stopped to see, to a room at the very back of the house. The walls were all glass, looking out onto these beautifully lit gardens. And there was a table, set just for the two of us. A white tablecloth, sparkling glasses, and silverware that glowed in the candlelight. It was just so perfect. "It's beautiful," was all I could manage to say. He pulled out a chair for me, and as I sat down, I felt like I'd walked into a fairy tale. The kind where the handsome prince is secretly a beast. Dinner just sort of appeared. The staff moved like quiet shadows, bringing these amazing dishes that smelled divine and probably cost a fortune. Sal ate with this slow, careful grace. His manners were flawless. We talked about little things and big things. He asked about my mother, your great-grandmother, And I found myself telling him things I'd never told a soul. How I felt so guilty for being tired of her being sick. How scared I was of losing her. Just how worn out I was from trying to be the strong one. And he just listened, honey, really listened. Like every single word I said was important. Like I was important. Finally, feeling a little brave from the wine, I asked, "What about you? Do you have any family?" His whole face changed. He told me he'd had a wife, a long, long time ago. When I asked what happened, he just said, "She died." It was so final. He told me it was 23 years ago. Cancer. He said, I had all the money in the world and it didn't matter. Couldn't save her. Before I even knew what I was doing, my hand was covering his. "I'm sorry." He just stared at our hands together, like he'd forgotten what comfort felt like. When he looked up at me, his eyes were just burning with this incredible intensity and a kind of desperation. "Don't do that," he said, his voice all rough. "Don't make me feel things I can't afford to feel." "Why not?" I asked. "Because men like me don't get happy endings, Lily," he said. "We get violence and betrayal, and anyone who gets close to us gets hurt." I should have taken my hand away right then. I should have just walked out of there and remembered this was all just a fairy tale. And in those stories, the innocent girl never fares well with the beast. But I couldn't move. Instead, I asked the one question that had been sitting in my heart since he first made his offer. "What do you really want from me?" His hand turned over and his fingers laced with mine, holding on so tight, like I was his anchor. "Everything," he said, so simply. "I want everything you're willing to give. And then I want more. I want to keep you safe and see you smile for real. I want to hear you laugh." He stopped himself then, his jaw tight. "You want what?" I whispered. My heart was just pounding. "I want to be someone different than who I am, someone who deserves you." His thumb was drawing little circles on my hand, and it sent shivers up my arm. "But I can't be. So instead, I'll take whatever bit of your time you'll give me and pretend I'm just a man having dinner with a beautiful woman. Not a monster, not a killer, just a man." Hearing him be so vulnerable like that, it changed everything. It broke down the last of my fear and started building something new, something thrilling and a little bit dangerous. "Salvatore," I started, but he shook his head. "Call me Sal, please. When it's just us." The name felt so familiar on my lips. "I should go," I said. It's too much." "Yes," he agreed, letting go of my hand but not my gaze. "You should run. You should never look back. You should forget all of this." "But," he said, and his smile was so sharp, "you won't. Because you felt it too, didn't you? That moment the world just shifted and everything else faded away, and it was just us." And he was right. We both knew it. The beast had shown me his castle, his pain, and his hunger. And I'd walked right in with my eyes wide open, knowing full well this kind of story could end in ruins or in redemption. And as I sat there, with Sal's gray eyes looking right into my soul, I realized I didn't care which it was. The next 3 weeks, honey, they passed in a blur, like a dream I never wanted to wake from. Sal didn't rush things. He never demanded anything. He just sort of entered my life, slow and steady, pulling me closer and closer, one careful step at a time. The first week, he sent flowers to the hospice, not to me, but to my mother. Beautiful white roses, her favorite. The card just said, "So she knows her daughter is cherished." My mother held that card for the longest time, her hands trembling, looking at me with so many questions in her eyes. "He must be very special," she whispered. I told her, "He's dangerous, Mama." And she just smiled and said, "All the best ones are, baby." The second week, Sal invited me to an art gallery opening. It was a black tie event. I wore that same blue dress. It was all I had. He picked me up in that fancy car, and he got out to open the door for me himself, with his security guys hanging back. At the gallery, people moved out of his way like he was a king. You could hear them whispering his name, half in awe, half in fear. All these important men came up to show their respect. Their eyes would flick over to me, full of curiosity. The women, dripping in diamonds, watched him with this hungry look. But his hand never left my back the entire night. It was warm and possessive, keeping me right there by his side, like I belonged there. "You're staring," I told him at one point, standing between a famous painting and his intense gaze. "I'm memorizing," he said. His fingers traced my spine through my dress, and it felt like a brand. "The way you look at art, like you're trying to find a piece of yourself in it." "Isn't that what art is for?" I asked. "For some." His voice got low, just for me. "I look at you and see everything I thought I'd buried 23 years ago. Hope, softness, a life beyond all this." I turned to face him then, not caring who was watching. "You're trying to scare me away," I said. "Yes. It's not working." "I know, and I think it all started with a smile. Not one of his usual sharp, almost grins, but a real one. It was so genuine it was devastating, and that's what really scared me. About 3 weeks in, our whole world tilted on its axis. It began with my phone ringing at 2 in the morning. I'd been having one of those awful, shapeless dreams where you're just running down hallways that never end, and the sound just jolted me awake. An unknown number. My voice was all gravelly with sleep when I said hello. It was S, and his voice had an edge I'd never heard, a kind of urgent fear. "I need you to listen very carefully," he said. "In exactly 3 minutes, 2 of my men will be at your door. You need to go with them. Don't take anything. Don't ask questions. Just go." A chill went right through me. "What's going on?" I asked. He told me someone had found out about me. I could hear shuffling in the background. "Someone who wants to hurt me is going to try and hurt you instead. The men will take you somewhere safe. Don't fight them, just trust me, S. Do you trust me, Lily?" And did I? This man? I'd known him for less than a month. A criminal who'd eased into my life with dirty money and the most beautiful lies. This complicated man who looked at me like I was something precious, not just some girl. "Yes," I whispered. And the surprising part was, I meant every word of it. "Good. Go now. I'll find you when it's safe." The line went dead. And sure enough, 3 minutes later, a knock came. It was 2 men I'd never seen, both in dark suits with faces that gave nothing away. One was younger, maybe 30, with a scar that ran from his ear to his jawline. The other was older, built like a refrigerator, but he had kind eyes that just didn't seem to fit the rest of him. "Miss Lily," the older one said, his voice soft, "we need to leave now." All I did was grab my phone, slip on my sneakers, and follow them out the door in my pajamas. Just an old college tee and some flannel pants. The whole building was dark and quiet as we went down the stairs and out a back door I never even knew was there. A different car was waiting. It was black and expensive, of course, but it was an SUV this time. The glass was so thick I could see all the layers in it when the dome light hit it. We drove for hours, leaving the city behind, passing through suburbs, and then into countryside I didn't recognize. Nobody said a word. The younger man drove with a kind of focus that told me he'd had military training. The older one sat in the back with me, his hand resting near the gun I could just make out under his jacket. The sun was just starting to rise when we arrived at a house hidden behind a tall gate and a wall of trees. It was modern, all sharp angles, glass and steel, sitting on a hill that overlooked nothing but woods. Inside, it was beautiful but empty. Minimalist furniture and security monitors in every room showing the view from what must have been dozens of cameras. There was even a safe room with a door that looked like it could survive anything. "You'll stay here," the older man said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We'll be just outside. If you need anything, press this." He handed me a little remote, like a key fob with a single button. One press. We'll come running. How long? My voice sounded so small in that huge, empty space. Until Mr. Constantino says it's safe. They left me there, standing in a living room that cost more than my parents' house, still in my pajamas, just trying to hold myself together. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from S. I'm sorry, I'll explain everything. You're safe there. My best men are with you. Oh, I wanted to throw that phone across the room, to scream at him. Instead, I just typed back, I'm scared. His reply was instant. I know, so am I. But I won't let anyone hurt you. I'd burn the world down first. And the strangest thing was, I believed him. 2 whole days went by. I wandered around that house like a prisoner in a very beautiful cell. The guards changed shifts, but they never spoke to me. Food would just appear. Good food, the kind Sa knew I loved. Someone had even packed clothes for me, in my size and toiletries. They'd thought of everything except for my freedom and answers. On the third day, S finally came. I heard the cars first, more than one, the sound of tires on the gravel, and then sharp, urgent voices. I looked out the window and saw him walking toward the house, his silver hair catching the sun. His face was a mask of cold fury. He looked like he hadn't slept a wink, like he'd aged 10 years in just 3 days. The door opened and he filled the frame, his eyes finding mine instantly, scanning me from head to toe, checking for any sign that I was hurt or afraid. You're okay, he said, and it wasn't a question. Am I? I crossed my arms, all the fear suddenly turning into anger. I've been locked in a gilded cage for 3 days with no explanation, S. Men with guns have been watching my every move, so you tell me, am I okay? He started toward me, and I took a step back, without even thinking. A flicker of pain crossed his face, so fast I almost missed it. Don't, he said, his voice rough. Don't be afraid of me. Be angry. Hate me if you have to. But never fear me. Not you. Then tell me what's happening. Tell me why I'm here. He let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. It was the first time I'd ever seen him make a gesture that wasn't perfectly controlled. There's a man, Dmitry Volkov, a Russian. We've been competing. For territory, for business. It's the way our world works. And he found out about you. He saw us at the gallery, had his people follow you, watch you. His hands tightened into fists at his sides. He sent me a message, said he would take from me what I obviously valued most. He said you would pay for my ambitions. A cold dread washed over me. So you hid me away. I protected you. He closed the distance between us in 2 quick strides, his hands gripping my shoulders, his face just inches from mine. Do you have any idea what these people are capable of? The things they would do just to hurt me? I've seen things. Women return to their lovers in pieces, just as a warning. I cannot, let that happen to you. So what now? I just live in hiding forever? You built me a nicer cage, S, but it's still a cage. No. His grip on my shoulders tightened. Now, I end this. Now, I make sure Dmitry Volkov understands exactly what happens when you threaten what is mine. That possessiveness in his voice, it should have sent me running. Instead, I felt this strange warmth spread through me, dangerous and exciting all at once. I'm not yours, I said, but the words came out like a whisper. Aren't you? His hand moved up to cup my face, his thumb gently tracing my cheek. Tell me you haven't thought about me every single day. Tell me you don't feel this thing between us. Tell me when you close your eyes at night, you don't wonder what it would be like if I touched you. Really touched you. And I couldn't, because he was right. For 3 weeks I had been falling into whatever this was, something that felt like a strange mix of obsession and safety, a poison I wanted more of. This is crazy, I whispered. Yes, he said. You're twice my age. You're a criminal, a killer. Everything I should be running from. Yes. His other hand slid into my hair, tilting my head back so his eyes could burn into mine. Tell me to stop, Lily. Tell me you want no part of this, and I will walk away. I'll make sure you're always protected, that you have whatever you need, and I will never see you again. Just say the word. My heart was beating so fast. This was it, the moment I could step back from the edge and save myself. And if I don't? The words were so quiet, I could barely hear them myself. If I don't want you to stop? The sound he made was somewhere between a growl and a groan. Then God help us both. He kissed me then, and it wasn't gentle or hesitant. It was weeks of holding back, shattering into something fierce and desperate that just took my breath away. His mouth was on mine as if he were a dying man, and I was his last breath of air. His hands pulled me tight against him until there was no room for anything between us. I'd been kissed before, you know. Sweet, fumbling kisses from boys I barely remember. But this was something else entirely. This was fire and ownership, and a hunger so deep it felt like it could swallow us both whole. His tongue swept into my mouth, and I met his desperation with my own, my hands grabbing his shirt, just trying to get closer. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard, his forehead resting against mine. You should have told me to stop, he said, his voice rough. I know this won't be easy. Being with me means there will always be danger. It means always looking over your shoulder and trusting men with guns to keep you safe. I have enemies who would use you to break me. I know I'm selfish enough to keep you anyway. His hands framed my face, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. I'm selfish enough to want to lock you away where no one can touch you, and call it love when it's really just obsession. I looked right into his eyes, seeing my own reckless feelings reflected there. And what if I'm selfish enough to want to be kept? His smile was sharp and dark, and filled with 1,000 promises. Then I'll give you everything. Every dark, damaged, dangerous part of me. And I will take everything you offer me in return, until we can no longer tell where you end, and I begin. S. But first, he cut in, his face hardening into that lethal look I would come to know so well. I have to handle Dmitri. I have to make sure you are truly safe. Not just hidden away, but protected by a reputation so fierce that men will be afraid to even breathe your name. What are you going to do? I asked. What I should have done years ago. He kissed me again, but this time it was softer, almost tender. End this war, on my own terms. I'm going to make an example of him that will echo for a very, very long time. Every single one of his rivals in the city. A spike of fear went through me. You're going to kill him, I said. Yes. There was no hesitation in his voice, just a cold, hard fact. Him, and anyone else who thinks they can use you against me. I'll paint the streets red if that's what it takes to keep you safe. I should have been horrified. I should have run. But instead, I kissed him back, tasting both danger and devotion, and I whispered, "Come back to me." Always, he promised. No matter what it costs, no matter who I have to bury, I will always come back to you. He left after that, taking all that cold anger with him. I was left in the safe house with 2 guards, and the dizzying, terrifying knowledge that my fate was sealed. I had chosen the beast, and I would have to live with the consequences of his world. Blood that was spilled for me, because I'd become the one thing a man like Salvatore Constantino that he could never give me. It was his soft spot, his obsession, the one thing that could make him set the world on fire. For 72 hours, my love S was gone. I spent those 3 days pacing our safe house like a wild animal in a cage, watching news reports that told me nothing but hinted at everything. A warehouse fire over in the industrial district. 3 bodies pulled from the river. A little restaurant tied to the Russians was suddenly shut down, its windows all broken out. The guards never said a word, but I could see it in their eyes. A new kind of respect, tinged with something else. Maybe it was fear or awe at what their boss could do when someone he loved was threatened. That third night, sleep just wouldn't come. I remember standing by those big windows, looking out at the forest, my breath fogging up the glass. I was trying so hard not to picture S hurt somewhere, not to think about the chances of him keeping his promise to come back, and trying to ignore how much I needed him to. Then, around 3 in the morning, I heard engines, a lot of them, coming in fast. I remember pressing my hand to the cold glass, my heart pounding in my chest, just watching those headlights slice through the dark. The front door burst open. I heard sharp, tense voices, then heavy footsteps moving quickly. And then, there he was, standing in the living room doorway, and I just stopped breathing. He was alive, he was whole, but goodness, he looked like he'd been to hell and back. His shirt was ripped at the shoulder, with dried blood, not his, I prayed, spattered on the fabric. A dark bruise was already forming on his cheek. His knuckles were all torn up, but his eyes, honey, his eyes found mine right away, and the relief in them was a perfect mirror of my own. Lily. That's all he said, just my name, but it held everything we hadn't said. I was across that room in a heartbeat, throwing myself into his arms. They wrapped around me instantly, holding me so tight, and he buried his face in my hair. He smelled of smoke and metal and that wonderful cedar smell that, for me, had come to mean safety. "You're okay," I breathed into his neck. "You're okay." His voice was a low rumble against my chest. "Did you ever doubt me?" he asked. "Every single second," I told him. He leaned back just enough to look at me, his thumb gently brushing my cheek, a touch so tender it didn't match the state he was in. "It's over," he said. "Dimitri is gone. His whole crew is in chaos. Anyone who even gave you a funny look is either 6 feet under or running for the hills." "How many?" I asked, almost afraid of what he'd say. He just set his jaw. "Enough," he said. "Enough so that no one will ever bother you again. Enough that from now on, your name is the same as mine. You're untouchable. Protected. Mine." You know, that kind of possessiveness should have scared a young woman. But for me, it just felt like the warmest blanket. "What did you do, S?" He kissed my forehead then, and my temples, and my cheeks, these soft little kisses like a prayer. "What I should have done the minute I knew what you were becoming to me." "And what am I becoming to you?" He grew so still then, his eyes searching mine with a look so intense it made my legs feel weak. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with feelings he'd probably never shown anyone else in his life. "Everything. My obsession." He cleared his throat. "My salvation. The only truly good thing in a life I built from shadows." His hands tightened on my face. "I love you, Lily. I'm too old for you. I'm too broken, with too much blood on my hands to deserve a single moment with you. But I love you with every part of me that's still capable of love." Oh, honey, those words just hit me. Not because I didn't know. I'd seen it in the way he looked at me, in every touch, every time he was a little too protective. But hearing him say it made it real, made this thing between us something I couldn't explain away anymore. "I'm terrified of you," I whispered. "Good. You should be. But I love you anyway." And with that, his composure just broke. He kissed me like a man taking his very last breath, his mouth all at once. I gave it right back to him, my fingers getting lost in his hair, pulling him even closer, needing to feel all of him just to prove he was really there, that he was really mine. He lifted me up without ever breaking our kiss, and my legs just wrapped right around his waist as he carried me to the bedroom I'd been staying in. The door slammed shut, and he laid me down on the bed so gently, his body covering mine, his weight a comforting anchor. "Tell me to stop," he said against my lips, even as his hands were exploring every curve of my body through my clothes. "Tell me this is too much, too soon." "Don't stop," I whispered, my own hands fumbling with the buttons on his ruined shirt. Don't you dare stop. What happened next? Well, it was a storm and a promise all rolled into one. He touched me as if I was the most precious thing in the world, yet something that was completely his. It was like he was memorizing every sound I made, every shiver, every single way to make me come undone. And when we finally came together, moving in that rhythm that's as old as the world itself, I looked right into his stormy eyes and saw my own love reflected there. It was pure madness, really. A beautiful kind of destruction, all wrapped up in promises whispered between silk sheets. It was love in its most dangerous and beautiful form. Afterwards, we were just a tangle of limbs, my head resting on his chest, while his fingers drew little circles on my shoulder. The sky outside was just starting to turn that soft pre-dawn gray. "What happens now?" I asked him quietly. "Now?" He kissed the top of my head. "Now, I take you home. Not your old apartment. It's not safe anymore. To my home. Our home. And I'm going to spend every day I have left making sure you're safe." "That sounds a bit like another cage," I teased. "Perhaps," he said, his arms tightening. "But this time you'll have the key. You can go whenever you want. I'll never stop you." "You say that now. I mean it." He gently tilted my chin up so I had to look at him. "I'm a lot of things, Lily. A killer, a criminal, a man who has done terrible things for power, but I won't ever cage you. I won't trap you. You stay because you choose to, or you don't stay." I looked at his face then, really looked. At the scar that cut through his eyebrow, the fresh bruise on his cheek, the silver in his hair that always made him look so handsome instead of old. 62 years of a hard life had carved him into this person who was both beautiful and terrifying. And here he was, offering me my freedom, even when I knew every part of him wanted to lock me away from the world. "I choose to stay," I said. And the relief that washed over his face, I'll never forget it. "Why?" "Because for the first time in 3 years, you made me feel like something other than a burden, or a maid, or a daughter watching her mother fade away. Because when you look at me, I feel like you actually see me." I touched his cheek, the stubble scratching my palm. "And because I've never felt safer than when I'm with the most dangerous man I've ever met." He chuckled. "You're insane." I suppose I was. I remember smiling against his chest. "But you were just as foolish for wanting me." He once told me, with this sound of wonder in his voice, that people said he was too old for love, too cold, too lost, too much of a monster to ever feel anything real again. "And what did I think?" he asked, rolling us over so he was looking down at me. His whole body was a shield over mine, his eyes just blazing with everything he felt inside. I told him they were wrong, that I thought he was just waiting for someone brave enough, or maybe silly enough, to look past the scary parts and find the man. "And what if I see both?" he asked, "the man and the monster?" "Then you're the only person who ever has," I told him. He kissed me then, so slowly and deeply it left me dizzy. He promised he'd spend the rest of his life proving he was worth it. We left that house the very next morning. The ride into the city felt completely new this time. I sat right beside him, and he never let go of my hand, just tracing little circles on my palm. It was then I noticed his security had doubled. 2 cars in front, 2 more behind, all of them, full of serious-looking men whose job was now to protect me just as much as they protected him. "I have to see my mother," was the first thing I said when we hit the city line. "Of course," he said, and lifted my hand for a kiss. "We'll go right now." He told me then, "Lily, she's been moved to the best hospice on the East Coast. Better doctors, better everything. Whatever time she has left, she'll be comfortable." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "You didn't have to do that." He just shook his head. "Yes, I did. She's your mother. That makes her my family, and I always protect my family." That hospice. Oh, it was nothing like the first place. It was this beautiful estate, with gardens and fountains. The rooms felt more like you were in a 5-star hotel. My mother was sitting in a wheelchair near a window that looked out on a rose garden. I hadn't seen her look that peaceful in months. When we came in, her eyes went right to him, then down to our hands, all tangled together, and she noticed how he stood next to me, like a guardian. "So you're the one," she said. Her voice was faint, but so clear. "I am." He walked over, and what he did next, I'll never forget it. He knelt by her wheelchair to be at her level. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Salvatore Constantino." My mother just looked at him with that sharp way mothers have. "I know who you are. I might be sick, but I still see the news, hear the stories." He nodded. "Then you know what I am." She reached out, her hand so thin, and touched his face. "I know what you do," she said. It was such a tender gesture, it made him freeze completely. "But I also know what you've done for my girl. The bills you handled, the weight you took off her shoulders, the way you look at her, like she's the center of your universe." "She is," he said, so simply. My mother's eyes welled up with tears. "You love her more than my own life," he told her. "And you'll protect her, even from yourself if you have to." He answered without a moment's pause. "Always." She nodded, a slow, thoughtful motion, and then looked at me. "Come here, baby." I knelt down next to him, and my mother took both of our hands and folded them together. "I don't have much time left," she said. "Weeks, maybe only days. But I need to know, before I go, that you'll be happy. That someone will be there for you." "Mama, please don't." But she wouldn't let me finish. She gave our hands a little squeeze. "I see the way you look at him, Lily. Like he's your whole world, your safe harbor. And I see how he looks at you, like you're the one thing that can save him." She turned back to him. "Promise me. Promise me you'll look after her when I'm not here. That you'll love her when she's being stubborn, when she's sad, even when she tries to push you away." "I promise," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "On my life, my honor, on everything I am, I promise." A smile spread across my mother's face. It was the first real, happy smile I'd seen since she got sick. "Then I can go in peace," she whispered. That's when I finally broke down, just sobbing into his shoulder while he held me tight and my mother stroked my hair. The three of us, we were all connected in that little room, by love and by loss, and this crazy, winding road that had somehow brought us all together. Just 3 days after that, my mother passed away in her sleep. It was peaceful, no pain, just flowers and music. She knew her daughter was going to be okay. He was my rock through all of it. The funeral plans, the service, that awful moment they lowered her coffin, and I felt like a part of me was going with her. He just held me through the grief. He didn't try to fix it or say silly things. He was just there, solid and steady. And when I finally started to come out of that fog, about 3 weeks later, he was right there waiting. Not rushing me, not asking for anything, just waiting. "What happens now?" I asked him one morning. We were in the bedroom of the house that was now ours, watching the sun come up over the city he secretly ran. He came up right behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Now," he said softly, "you heal, you live, and you let me love you the way you're supposed to be loved, with everything I have, no holding back." I remember leaning against him. "They're always going to talk, you know, about our age, about what you do, about a girl like me ending up with a man like you." He just kissed my temple. "Let them talk. They used to say I was too old, too cold, too dangerous for love. You showed them they were all wrong." "How?" I asked. "By being brave enough to really see me. By choosing me even after you knew everything. By loving me when the whole world said I was unlovable." He turned me around to face him then, and his eyes, oh, they were just burning with this incredible intensity. "You did what no one else ever dared to do, Lily. You made a monster remember how to be a man." I reached up and touched his face. This incredible, complicated man who had turned his whole world upside down just to keep me safe. You were always a man, S. You just needed someone to remind you. He framed my face with his hands. And now that I remember, now that I know what this feels like, to love and be loved. Now, I finished for him, standing on my toes to kiss him. You never forget it again. 6 months later, I was standing in the garden of our home, not the safe house, but his main house, where he'd lived all by himself for 23 years before I came along. That garden became my little project. It was something to keep my hands and my mind busy when he was off handling his business, which I never asked about. I planted roses, the white kind my mother always loved, and lavender and jasmine. The scent in the evening air always brought back good memories. You've been out here all afternoon. I turned and saw him watching me from the terrace. He had 2 glasses of wine with him. He'd taken off his suit jacket and tie, his shirt was unbuttoned at the top, and he looked more at peace than I'd ever seen him. The silver in his hair was catching the sunset, making him look like he was glowing. I was just thinking about my mom, I told him as he came to sit with me, handing me a glass. She would have really loved this garden. She loved you more, he said, putting his arm around my shoulders as he sat on the stone bench. Everything else was just a bonus. We just sat there for a while, quiet and comfortable, watching the sky turn all shades of orange and pink. That became our little tradition. Evenings in the garden, no bodyguards, no business calls, just away from the constant noise of the empire he ran so ruthlessly. Out there, we were just a man and a woman who had found each other when it seemed impossible. I got a phone call today, I said after a while. From the community college. He went completely still. They accepted me into the nursing program. My classes will start in the fall. I watched his face closely, trying to see how he really felt. We had talked about it, about me wanting to do something that was my own, something to honor my mom by helping other people's mothers. But talking about it and doing it are 2 different things. That's wonderful, he said, his voice perfectly calm. But I had learned to see the little signs, the way his shoulders tensed up, the slight tightness around his eyes. You'll be amazing at it. You're worried. I'm always worried, he admitted, putting his wine down and turning to face me. You'll be out there in the open. You'll be vulnerable, and I won't be able to protect you like I can here. There are still people, Lily, who would use you to get to me. Fewer than before, but they're out there. I kept my voice soft, but I was firm. So what? I should stay locked up in this gorgeous cage forever? I love you, and I love the life we have, but I can't just be something you own, something you hide away. I have to be a person, too. I saw the muscle in his jaw twitch. I know. Do you? I asked gently. Because sometimes the way you look at me, it's like you're trying to memorize every detail before I vanish. Like you're just waiting for me to finally see you for what you are and run. That's when he asked, Aren't you? The vulnerability in his voice just shattered my heart. I'm 62 years old, Lily. You're 26. One day you'll see the monster everyone else does. You'll see the years between us. You'll see the blood on my hands, the darkness in me, and you'll leave. And I'll have to let you go, because I gave you my word. I put my glass down and climbed right onto his lap, making him look me in the eye so he could see I was telling the truth. Listen to me, Salvatore Constantino. I'm not going anywhere. Not because I'm blind to who you are. I see all of it. I see the violence, the danger, and yes, I see the darkness. But I also see the man who held me when I cried for my mom. The man who reads poetry at night when he thinks I can't hear him. The man who funds 3 scholarships at that college, anonymously, because he believes people deserve a second chance, even if he doesn't think he does. His hands were on my hips, his eyes just searching mine, full of this desperate hope. You know about those scholarships? I know everything, S. I watch you. I see you. I held his face between my hands, feeling the rough stubble on my palms. And yes, you're older. And yes, what we have is messy and dangerous and probably wouldn't be called normal. But I never wanted normal. I want you. I want all of this. I want the man who was supposedly too old for, who loves me so fiercely it scares us both. You make it all sound so simple. It is. I love you. You love me. The rest of it is just noise. He pulled me close, burying his face in my neck, and his shoulders started to shake. It took me a second to realize he was crying, these silent tears that just soaked my shirt. I never thought I'd have this again, he whispered against my skin. After Maria died, I just locked it all away. I told myself I was better off cold, better off on my own. And then you looked at me like I was just a man, and everything I had buried for so long just came roaring back. Good, I said, holding him tighter. Because that man, the one who feels and loves and still hopes, that's the man I fell for. Not the boss, not the legend. Just you, S. He pulled back. His eyes were a little red but so clear, and he kissed me with a tenderness that made my heart ache. Go to nursing school. Go chase your dreams. Be your own person. Just promise me you'll let me keep you safe. Promise me you'll accept the security, the bodyguards, all of it. 2 guards, I negotiated, not 10, and they wait outside my classroom. He almost smiled. 4 guards, 2 in, 2 out. 3, that's my final offer. His lips twitched. You bargain like a master. I kissed him again, a softer one this time. We'll make it work, S. The age gap, the danger, this whole complicated life. We'll figure it all out together. Together, he repeated, like the word was new to him. I haven't had a together in 23 years. Well, you've got one now, I told him. Better get used to it. The next 4 months, honey, they were just a happy blur. I started my classes and dove into my studies with a passion I hadn't felt since before my mother got sick. And S, he wasn't wrong to worry. We had a few scares. A car that followed me, a man asking too many questions at the coffee shop, a threat spray-painted on my car once. But every single time, Sal's security team handled it quietly and effectively and, after everything that happened, whenever S held me, I could feel this little tremor in his hands, a fear he never really spoke about. I can't lose you, he'd murmur into the darkness of our room. He'd tell me that surviving Maria only happened because he had nothing left but me. You're all of it, he'd say. If I lost you, there'd be nothing left to put back together. I'd always tease him, saying I was careful and far too stubborn for anything to happen to me. But the real test, that came on a Tuesday in October. I was just leaving campus, my bag full of books, thinking about some big exam. My security detail, we'd settled on 3 men by then, kept a respectful distance. Then this black sedan, not one of S's, pulled up. It just felt wrong, The window came down, and a man I'd never seen before, maybe 30 with eyes like ice chips and a chilling smile, leaned out. Lily Morrison, he said. Or is it Lily Constantino now? That's what the old man calls you, I hear. My guards were on it in a second, stepping right between me and that car. But the man just chuckled. Easy, fellas. I'm just here with a message. He held up a phone, and on the screen was a picture of S leaving a restaurant. Tell your man, he said. The Italians are upset about the Volkov mess. Butchering Dmitri made him some new enemies. There's a price on both your heads. I felt a cold spike of fear, but I made my voice sound steady. Tell them to come and try, I said. See how it goes. Oh, that smile of his got wider. We will. But we wanted you to know first. We wanted you to live with it for a while. To have the old man watch you, waiting for a bullet that could come from anywhere. That's the real punishment, isn't it? Not the end, but waiting for it. The window slid up and the car drove off. My lead guard, Marco, he was a former Navy SEAL who'd been with S for 15 years, was instantly on his phone. Boss, we've got a problem. It felt like S was there in 10 minutes, his car screeching to a stop right by the library. He was out before his car even stopped moving, his eyes frantic, his face so pale. Are you hurt? His hands were all over me, checking, his breathing all fast and choppy. I'm fine, S, I promised him. Just shaken. His voice turned deadly cold, a tone I rarely heard. Who was it? What did they say? Marco told him everything, and I watched S's jaw get tighter and tighter with every word. When he was done, S pulled me into a hug so tight it almost hurt. You're done with school, he said, his voice muffled in my hair. It's not safe. We'll get tutors. You can finish your degree at home, but you're not coming back here. No. I pushed away just enough to look him in the eye. No, S. That's what they want. They want me afraid and hiding. I won't give them that. Lily, I'm serious. I grabbed the front of his shirt, making him see how much I meant it. Add more security. Sweep the campus every day. Do whatever you have to do so you feel I'm safe. But I'm not quitting. I won't let them win. His voice cracked then. You're asking me to watch you walk into danger every single day, to send you out there knowing men want to hurt you because of me, because loving me put a target on your back. Yes. I put my hand on his cheek, and I could feel him trembling. I'm asking you to trust me, to trust your men, and to trust that we're stronger together than they are. I can't lose you, he whispered, so broken and desperate. Lily, I can't. You won't, I told him, and I kissed him with all the certainty I had. But you have to let me live my life, S. Really live it. Not just exist in some beautiful cage. That's what love is, isn't it? It's not about owning someone or protecting them from everything. It's about trusting them to be themselves, even when it scares you to death. He was quiet for a long moment, just resting his forehead on mine, his breathing shaky. When he finally spoke, I could barely hear him. You're braver than I am. No, I said. I just have something worth being brave for. That night, S called a meeting, not at our house, but at a restaurant he owned, one of his legitimate places. I sat right next to him at the head of this long table, surrounded by men who looked like they'd walked right out of a gangster movie. His inner circle, the foundation of his whole world. This is Lily, S said, and his hand rested on my shoulder, so possessively. Some of you know her. All of you know who she is to me. The men all nodded, looking at me with this mix of curiosity and respect. The Italians have threatened her. They've threatened us. S's voice was calm, but you could feel the rage simmering right underneath. They believe they can scare me by going after what I love. They think my age has made me soft, that I'm too old to fight for what is mine. He stood up then, and I swear the whole room got colder. They are wrong. For the next hour, I watched the S I loved, the one who held me when I was sad, disappear. In his place was the boss, the man who built an empire. He laid out his plan like a general, picking apart the Italian crew, their supply lines, their money, hitting them where they'd feel it the most. We won't start this fight, he said at the end, but we will finish it. So completely that a decade from now, people will still tell stories about what happens when you threaten Salvatore Constantino's family. The men filed out, all business and grim faces, leaving just the two of us. That was terrifying, I told him. That was necessary, he said, pulling me onto his lap and wrapping his arms around me. I won't ever apologize for what I am, Lily, or for what I can do. Those men threatened you. They decided their own fate. I know, and I truly did. I had accepted that part of him when I chose to love him. Just come back to me, I whispered. Whatever you have to do, whoever you have to be to keep us safe, just always come back to me. He kissed my forehead, my cheek, and then my lips. I swear. That whole thing lasted for 3 weeks. I barely saw S. He'd be gone before sunrise and back long after midnight, looking like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. But he always came to our bed, always held me, and always whispered that it was almost over. And then, one night, he came home early. I was in the garden. It was my peaceful place through all the chaos, and I heard his shoes on the stone terrace. I turned, and the look on his face, honey, it just took my breath away. It was relief, pure, absolute relief. It's done, he said, just like that. The threat's gone. The Italians agreed to terms. You're safe. I ran to him, and he just swept me up off my feet, burying his face in my hair. What did you do? I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. What was necessary? He set me down, so gently, holding my face in his hands. But it's over, really. The whole city knows you're not to be touched, that you're mine. And anyone who forgets will face something that makes dying look like a gift. I probably should have been horrified. I should have run from that darkness in him. But instead, I just kissed him. And all I could taste was relief and love and the silent promise that he would set the world on fire for me. Thank you, I breathed against his lips. For what? For proving them wrong. For showing them you're not too old for love or too cold. You're just a man who loves with everything he has and protects what's his. He corrected me softly. What's ours? This life, I remember thinking. This love. This future we're making against all odds. Ours, I agreed. A year passed, and there I was, standing in a hospital room in scrubs after my very first shift as a licensed practical nurse. My feet were killing me, my back ached, and I smelled like a bottle of disinfectant. And I had never, ever been happier. S was waiting for me outside, leaning against his car, looking so incredibly out of place. But the second he saw me, his whole face lit up with that special smile, the one he only ever used for me. How was it? He asked as I walked into his arms. Exhausting, scary, and absolutely perfect. I just melted into his hug, his arms so strong and sure around me. I helped save a life today, S. I'm proud of you, he said, kissing the top of my head. More than you'll ever know. We drove home through the city that he ran, a city I was finally learning to call my own. The security was still there, trailing behind us, but it felt different. Less like a cage and more like a safety net. We had found our balance, S and I. A balance between his need to protect me and my need to have my own life. That night, after a quiet dinner in the garden, he took my hand and led me upstairs. I was expecting something else entirely, but he sat me down on the edge of the bed and knelt right in front of me, his stormy eyes so serious. "What are you doing?" I asked, and my heart just started pounding. He pulled a little velvet box from his pocket. "They all said I was too old for this," he started, his voice a little thick. "Too set in my ways. Too broken to be a husband again." Tears started to well up in my eyes. "But you, Lily, you loved me anyway. You looked past the gray hairs, the reputation, the darkness, and you chose me. You choose me every single day." He opened the box, and inside was a ring with a sapphire the color of a midnight sky, sparkling with diamonds. "So I'm asking you to choose me one last time. Marry me, Lily. Build this life with me. Let me spend the rest of my years showing you that love doesn't have an expiration date." Yes. The word was so choked up I could barely get it out. "Yes, of course, yes." His hands were shaking as he slid that beautiful ring onto my finger. Then he pulled me right down to the floor with him, just holding me like I was the only thing keeping him from floating away. "I love you," he whispered. "My brave, beautiful girl who was brave enough to love a monster." "You're not a monster," I told him, The same thing I must have said 100 times. You're just a man who loves me, and I'm just a woman who's crazy enough to love you back. Crazy, he agreed, smiling against my lips. Definitely crazy, but happy. So happy. He kissed me then, long and slow, and full of promises for our future. They said I was too old for love, but you proved them wrong. Amore, you proved them all wrong. And as we lay there together, in the room that had become ours, with the moonlight catching the sapphire on my finger, I thought about the crazy journey that had brought us here, to this life. From that very first night to this moment now, building a future that nobody thought was possible. They all said he was too old, too cold, too dangerous for a second chance at love or happiness. But I dared to look past all of that, and I saw a man. A man who needed love just as much as he needed to breathe. A man who'd been waiting 23 years for someone to be brave enough to truly see him. And in return, he gave me his entire world, safety, and a love so fierce it still takes my breath away sometimes. We were an unlikely pair, I know. The aging crime lord and the young nurse, the monster and the innocent girl. But we were also just Sal and Lily. Two people who found each other against all odds and decided to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of our lives. They said he was too old for love. Well, we proved them wrong, didn't we? You know, by every sensible measure, I was getting it all magnificently, beautifully wrong. But wrapped up in his arms, with our whole future right there in front of us, so full of promise, I knew right down to my bones that I would do it all over. Every single heart-stopping moment, every choice that terrified me, all of it. Because real love, the kind that truly changes you and makes even the hardest of people remember their heart, it doesn't listen to what's proper or what other people think. It just is. And ours was a light that would see us through all the days we had left. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.